Good morning. Welcome everyone to GDA Connect at the Green Zone of COP28 in Dubai. Thank you all for joining us, whether in person or remotely. I am Rasha Helwa, the director of the Atlantic Council's Empower Me initiative, and I'm honored to be here with you today. Our discussion today will focus on unleashing the green energy potential in the Middle East, North, and Sub-Saharan Africa. We will explore the opportunities and challenges within the region's green energy sector from policy and business perspectives. And before we start the conversation, let me briefly introduce our distinguished panelists. We are privileged to have with us today Mai Abdurrahim, President of GE Vernova Africa, responsible for market engagement across GE Vernova's portfolio and formerly President of North Africa markets at General Electric. Additionally, we have Marco Arcelli, CEO of Aquapowers, overseeing a portfolio of power generation and desalinated water production plants with a presence in 12 countries across the Middle East, Africa, Central and Southeast Asia. Lastly, we're honored to have Dr. Ahmed Badr, Director of Project Facilitation and Support at the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, with over 30 years of international banking and finance expertise. Esteemed panelists, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Let's get this conversation started. So, my first question will go to Mai, and I know that GE Vernova operates in Africa, the Middle East, and on a global scale. What specific factors make the Middle East and Africa more appealing for GE Vernova? And additionally, what are the primary regulatory hurdles that currently inhibit the expansion of your investments in the region?
Hello. So thank you so much, Rasha, and thanks for the opportunity to be with you all here today. First, in a few seconds, allow me to tell you more about GE Vernova. So GE Vernova is the planned standalone company for GE, which comprises the energy portfolio of GE across power generation from conventional sources or renewable energy sources, going through the transmission and distribution of electricity. All of this is combined, supported by our digital solutions. So building on over 130 years of GE's technologies and presence across the globe, and with the 80,000 employees, with 54,000 wind turbines, 7,000 gas turbines, we are powering more than 26% of the world's electricity. So I just wanted to give this start to, because people may know GE, but GE Vernova is the energy portfolio of GE. So back to your question, actually the region here is very interesting. It's very interesting and appealing to us in GE Vernova. If you look at the region that I cover, which is the Africa, and it has also part of the North Africa part has part of the Middle East, you can find the diversity across the technologies across the whole continent. So we are present there, providing the continent with our technologies tailored to the specific needs for each country. So across hydropower generation, servicing our nuclear power only plant in South Africa, going through renewable energy, supporting the grid and transmission of the electricity across the continent. All of this combined is aligned 100% with our identified mission, which is electrifying the world while simultaneously working to decarbonize it.
And so, Mai, again, what sort of challenges do you face when investing in the region?
That's a very good question. So, first, public-private sector collaboration is crucial. It's very important. When you look into the region here, it's very important to have clear, long-term legal and regulatory frameworks to support the businesses and to support the investment. Also, stable and consistent policies is so crucial to support also attracting more FDIs into the region. In addition to this, incentives to lower the cost of operating the current installed base, which the region spent billions on. It also helped extending its lifetime and also reducing the carbon emissions of this installed base. And equally important is financing, of course. We've been here at COP since it started. It's the number one topic that each session has to highlight and focus on. So financing is also crucial. But in the end, we always say it's not a single country's responsibility or single companies or single organization responsibility. It needs all efforts together and national commitments and consistent policies to support all of this.
Thank you, Mai. And next I'll move to Marco. And Marco, I know that Aquapower currently operates across 12 countries, more or less, spanning the Middle East, Africa, Central and Southeast Asia. Your project portfolio covers several MENA countries such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Oman, Egypt, and Morocco. How do you find the specific dynamics of working in each of these 5 Middle Eastern countries? From a business perspective, from a policy perspective, and also the potential you see in the solar, wind, particularly, power in these countries?
Yeah, we are a very large company in the energy transition. We control about 53 gigawatt of power and 7.6 million cubic meter of water desalination. That is about 30% of the consumption in the 4 countries where we operate the technology. So Saudi Arabia, here the Emirates, Bahrain and Oman. We launched and we are under construction with 2 green hydrogen plants, one very large in Saudi Arabia for export, and the other one is in Uzbekistan. So altogether we manage about $80 billion of our portfolio, and the goal is to triple it to $250 billion by 2030. So I'm saying this because when you reach this scale, of course, you need a lot of scale to add to your portfolio to really move the needle, to really, show the materiality of what you're doing. And that is, I think, one of the biggest points. The second point is I start talking about the energy quadrilemma, not just the trilemma. We need to add speed. We need to add speed for reaching the goals that we need to reach in order to protect this planet of ours. And so if you combine these two, that's the big difficulty that we find in Africa and Southeast Asia compared to other countries, particularly here in the Middle East. Those tend to be smaller, more fragmented, slower development. And so if you look at the best developers in this region, we are one of them, but there's others. None of us have made more than 1.5, 2 gigawatt in the last 15 years. If I look at Saudi Arabia or here in the Emirates, we do 1.5 gigawatt in one project. So that's I think the complexity and the difference of doing business in these countries. When I arrived, I just took over at Aquapower as CEO 8 months ago. And one thing that struck me really is that after Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, the biggest country for us is Uzbekistan. And I never had thought of Uzbekistan as a big energy destination or a big leader in the energy transition, but in fact it is. So I started to think, but what's making Uzbekistan, and in fact for me also, Saudi Arabia, kind of the beacon that they are today in decarbonization, in energy transition. And I think what I see is, one, you have leaders with a clear vision, very pragmatic, with targets that are not only net zero 2050, 2060, which is too far, but clear targets by 2030. The second is they foster a very constructive dialogue together with investors, because at the end they have a need, but we also have a need, and we have optionality to go in many different places. And once you do this, they take decisions very quickly. What I see in all this, because it's simple, you say, so have a dialogue and you can make it happen. You need also, we talked about financing, you need also somebody who is able to address the risk of countries that are just emerging. And those are the DFI, the Development Financing Institution. And I see in Uzbekistan a big role that has been played by EBRD. So bringing everybody around the table with a clear leader, a clear enabler, that is both on the financing and on the private sector, can go a really long way. The other thing that is differentiating these countries is this approach that is a mix. So it's not simply tenders, because tenders take a long time to prepare. It's fragmented because you never know, I'm winning one, but I don't know if I'm going to win the next one. So you can never take really a country approach where I say I go beyond the single project. So what they do is they take a dual track where one track is negotiated. So they call big companies like us, like Masdar, and they negotiate a part of the portfolio, a part of their need, where they say, you know, this is what is going to give me the scale to enable everybody else, the speed to show results quickly. The tenders will give me an idea of the price that I can use also to match and keep in balance. So this approach I see that is very, very useful, and it's something that I think countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, I see that it's coming more and more, should take in order to accelerate this transition.
Thank you, Marco. What about Sub-Saharan Africa? I know that this is something you're contemplating. How do you see these markets different from the rest of the region?
Yeah, we are today in Morocco, Egypt, and South Africa, like many of the developers, because the scale is bigger. Some of these countries have been actually visionaries. Morocco has been a pioneer of concentrated solar power many years ago. And I always say, you know, we should thank His Royal Highness Mohammed VI for the Noor Energy complex we have here that we just inaugurated, the largest complex in the world, the plants that we're building in South Africa, because they took the leadership, 10 years ago, before everybody believed in the technology. So really, we have to thank them. Today, we invested $3.2 billion in Morocco to build a position there. So the scale that you have in these three countries allowed basically to attract investors and to mobilize, kind of like what I was saying before. Now, the question for us is how can we go efficiently in countries that are a smaller scale and so maybe a little slower. So we are looking both at organic development there, we're potentially looking at acquisitions. So to me, it can also be a consolidation play where if you bring together different parties, maybe then you can accelerate, you can build the synergies, you can build the scale, and I hope that we can be successful there too, as we have been in these three countries.
Thanks, Marco. And I guess in this case, the role of financial institutions is key to bring in the concessional financing. Now let me go to you, Dr. Ahmed. There has been considerable optimism surrounding the commitments made by MENA governments to expedite the green energy transition. However, there's also a level of skepticism regarding sustainability of this trend. Many businesses express concerns about the potential waning of momentum once COP concludes its activities in the region this year. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, thank you, Rasha, very much for inviting me to this panel. Well, yes, there is skepticism, yes, I can see that. Actually, in IRENA, we've been looking to this region, and our numbers, as well as the number from the International Energy Agency, shows that the least region takes attraction by the developers and MDBs and even private sector at corporate level, at medium level, basically coming is Sub-Saharan Africa and Middle East. I don't want to add to my panelist colleagues mentioned about this. It's all about regulatory dysfunctioning, or maybe needs improvement. Let's put it that it needs a lot of improvement. But actually, let me put it in that way. All corporate developers, I would say that even, it's good that Marco just mentioned, Masdar, Aquapower, MDBs, they're only looking for bankable projects. If it's not bankable, they will not be in. Private sector are not going to consider any project if it's not bankable. And bankability is the issue. And I do agree that basically there is a huge reform behind each country, and each country has specific risks. But there is major ones that cross all the countries of MENA region, which is totally different than the Sub-Saharan Africa. Here I would like to differentiate. Sub-Saharan Africa mainly focusing on small scale or medium scale due to their topographies, while MENA region or North Africa in general, let's split also the MENA region between GCC countries and the North Africa countries. GCC, their network and transmission system is really better by far than European one. Even the European system operator or the EU transmission system operator, they are learning from GCC. That's really the fact. So we're talking about North Africa. North Africa has huge potential, but one of the major risks there are the geopolitical risk. And this is really driving a lot of developing renewable energy in these countries. In IRENA, we also established fund. We're working on that. But I can tell you by more than 7 large corporates that unless there is clear mitigation for geopolitical risk, and in some countries also, I would say, the provision of for risk, there is no any kind of moving on renewable energy. Because it's really very new technology and it still needs a lot of encouragement for MDBs to take the first step, as Marco mentioned, and then they will come in, because always MDBs need to leave the way for the others. The only way that could work out is basically what we call it sector policy support programs, or basically an policy or renewable energy based initiative to lead and pave the way for investors to come in. And here is what basically the new interventions that we are doing that together with the government of UAE, with COP28, and even earlier by COP27, that policy-based interventions has basically to take country by country because of the uniqueness of the geopolitical risk for each country. For example, if I take about the example of my country, I'm Egyptian, so green hydrogen is a key to export to Europe. And there is a new and different sets of risks that has to be considered in order to move ahead with proceeding with more renewable energy, because each 1,000 megawatt of solar or wind will generate only 400 megawatt of green hydrogen. Not to take long, I would say there is still a way to scale up renewable energy to meet 2030 targets, but each country in North Africa has to be taken case by case because they have different sets of risks. Again, that's totally different from GCC, because GCC is very advanced in renewable energy led by Saudi Arabia and Emirates. That's really true. And I believe that within COP28, as we heard over the past week, there is a lot of potential in order not only to launch several huge funds, but also to work on manufacturing renewable energy and start to nationalize the related industrialization of all renewable energy equipments. And this is another point that we discuss in the following discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Mai, let me go back to you. And so within the Middle East market, GE Vernova is interfacing with both consumers and producers. Do you believe that the slow growth in the renewable energy sector is primarily due to low demand for green energy, or is it attributed to a shortage of supply? Is this challenge more of a demand side issue or a supply side?
Okay, thank you, Rasha. So this question has different aspects and dimensions. So we can easily say both, supply and demand, but we need to look into each factor. If you look at the supply part of it, you need to consider the increasing demand on renewable energy from the Western countries. This is one factor. The supply chain challenges and the increasing cost of the deployment of renewable energy, it's also another factor. And when you look back to the demand part, I echo Dr. Ahmed here. It's not the same, even across one region. It's not the same. when you look at the GCC countries, and when you look at North Africa, and when you look at Sub-Saharan Africa. So each country has its own specific needs and capabilities and economic situation, which leads us back to the point that Marco mentioned, the common phrase energy trilemma, and he added the speed as a fourth dimension here. Each country in the whole region is looking or facing pressure to do the balance between affordability of the resource, affordability of deploying this, and reliability of the electricity, and also the sustainability. And with the 800 million people across the globe that lack access to electricity, so this is something they need to consider as well. A big portion of the 800 million people are in Africa. Almost 50% are in Africa. So each country has to look into access to electricity, and then considering what is the cost that they will provide electricity with to the people, to the industrial sector for their economic growth plan, and then the reliability. It's very important. I went through a report published by the Atlantic Council and also the International Energy Agency. More than 99% of the financing and funding is going towards power generation, either from conventional sources or renewable energy sources. A very small portion is going and directed towards transmission and distribution. So you are increasing the power generation, but you need at the same time to look into the infrastructure, the grid, how you're gonna work on this as well. So all of these are factors that you need to consider when you look into the supply and the demand. It's a combination, which gets us back to Dr. Ahmed's point that he mentioned.
Thank you, Mai. And Marco, let me ask you, Mai mentioned earlier the importance of having a strong PPP framework for the private sector to operate. Dr. Badr now mentioned the political risk and the need to mitigate that. Do you prefer to go into PPP, or do you prefer to engage directly with the private sector?
We are an independent power producer. So at the end, our goal, as Ahmed was saying, is to find bankable projects. So if there is no framework for a bankable project where you can get project financing, we simply cannot work there. We don't have the capacity. I think in this, my reflection has been also here at COP. You hear a lot of dreams and positive messages. But I reflected, I come from the global north. I've always worked in the global north, and now I've been 8 months managing a company with a lot of assets in the global south. And I see that the world is designed around the global north, and the announcements we hear are designed by people in the global north, and they're not sufficient. If I go back, how do you make a project bankable, or what could help? Take a country in Africa with a population the size of Italy, and the total installed capacity that is less than this solar complex that we have here. So one plant. It's not that they don't want electricity. They want electricity. How do you make it there? They want electricity that the people can afford. How do you make it affordable? You have to be able to depreciate the cost over a long period. 30 years, 35 years. So I'm looking for the longest possible contracts so that the local population can have affordable energy. If a DFI does not take a look beyond 15, 17 years, how can I? No? So that's the first thing. That's their role. No? So all the talks that we hear from big global institutions, I don't see that translated into action. I was in Europe, a lot of insurance company, banks stopped financing oil and gas projects. But 80% or 90% of demand growth is in the global south. So I say, for every dollar that I invest, I mobilize 10, because I keep 30, 40% of the equity and I do project financing. So I say, why don't you come and invest in my projects? We only invest in OECD. So what's your pledge, you know? You're not solving a problem. You're simply, sometimes feel doing it to put it on your annual report, no? I was speaking also at the philanthropy initiatives, business and philanthropy. And that's another great catalyst potential. It's $2 trillion a year that are spent. And then when I see what is done, and I'm not saying it's bad, no? I see support to local communities, a lot of great initiatives, but you touch, if you're good, 1,000 people, 5,000, because it's a customer acquisition type of relationship. It's a lot of legwork. I say, why don't you take $500 billion, say a quarter of that, put it into concessional funding for big infrastructure project instead. We can be the catalyst, no? So everything that we're talking about kind of remains there, but you need scale to change the situation in Africa and some of these countries, and I don't see things coming together to make it happen.
Thank you, Marco. That's definitely something to reflect on. And let me come back to you, Dr. Ahmed. Thinking about the MDBs, can you think of a successful example for a de-risking modality that they were able to use in other markets that compared to the Middle East?
Well, thank you very much for this question. It's a very tricky but good one. First of all, let me appreciate very much what I heard from Marco and Dr. Mai. That's really true. Most of one of the key challenges before answering your good question, Dr. Rasha, is that what Marco mentioned, that the thinkers around the systems to develop energy transition is by global north, which actually should be global south. And that's why Chinese are very smart how to do that, because they come and they take it following bottom-up approach. This is one of the issues that I really appreciate, that Aqua is always partnering with the Belt and Road Fund, because that's exactly what's needed, and that's why they take the price down. China now leading the competitiveness of the pricing globally, because they really look at what needed inside the markets, which is one of the very important factors. But going to your question, yes, there is a lot of good examples about this, but you know what? As Irina, and I'm in charge of the fund that I have World Bank and EBRD is partner with me, I'm unable to say which one is the best, because they are all my partners. They are putting with me $6 billion. So let me put it like in this way. The bottom-up approach, working with governments on their political will or buying in, is really what works to make the project happening. That's even for all projects at all scale. But to make it for you very easy, MENA and Sub-Saharan Africa is not the hardest region in the world. Let me put it in a more regional context. I can tell you that small island developing states, because there are two small states, one in the Pacific and one in the Caribbean. Project is there, takes 15 years to happen. 15 years. In Middle East, the average, as per our record as IRENA, the hardest country in MENA, it takes about 5 years. Within these 5 years, the prices is really changing. I still remember one of the very big developers like Aquapower, when they put the price competitively for wind, and let me give numbers because these numbers are already obsolete. When they got this project in one of the countries 7 years ago, they put $3.8 cent per kilowatt hour for onshore wind. Now, price is going to 2. While the time that happened between the contract award and the financial closure, it took the price down from 3.2 into 2.8. So imagine this is one of the risks. This means that what I'm saying is that there is no good example each example fit with its relevant conditions, project by project, even within one country. Because if I'm talking now about the example I've given now, it's about onshore wind, that's not the case for solar PV. So what I would say is that at the end, what counts is two things. Bankability, as Marco mentioned, and as Dr. Mai mentioned, that's really a key for a developer to move on. And you know what? Even MDBs, they will not go for non-profit project, but their profit margin is a little bit less. But still, they are making profit. What I wanted to say at the end to answer the question is that there is no, there is always relative answers. There is no absolute answers. Sorry, I'm talking about absolute answers. But what really counts is that the key important issue is to ensure the buying in and the political will from the governments to improve the institutional and regulatory structure to accept private sector to come in. And here is again, I'm going to the first answer I mentioned in the earlier question. Policy-based reform and putting some kind of policy-based lending for the countries to accept the private sector is a matter of how we can do that very quickly. All countries wanted that now in order to have an conducive and attractive financial system and a business conducive system to attract the private sector. I hope my answer is very clear, but I'm sorry for being long. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Mai, I think Marco mentioned something very important about costs, and you did as well. Most of the markets you're operating in, if we exclude the GCC, MENA markets, middle-income economies, they're going all through some economic crisis. How do you see the cost factor coming down to be affordable to the consumers, and then hopefully to consolidate the demand side of your equation?
So, as you mentioned, and as we all agree, cost is a key factor to determine any decision. But in the end, it's a balance between what you need and the cost of what you need. And if we focus on renewable energy, especially in the region here, it's more than 60% of the best solar and wind locations are present in the region. And also, 40% of the mineral resources are also present in the region here. So looking into these factors would help a lot in getting the cost down. Also, I would like to highlight gas power generation, because it's also important when you look at the whole supply chain and the whole picture of the energy trilemma. Gas-fired power plant could reduce the emissions by a big percentage. If you convert from heavy fuel oil turbines to gas-powered turbines, just this conversion could drop the carbon emissions. So it's also a solution in addition to the renewable energy. Coal-fired power plants, if you convert from coal-fire to gas-fire, you are reducing with a huge percentage. So these are the solutions. If we look at, it would help as well in reducing the emissions and also make decrease the pressure on the cost factor when we look also on the cost of deploying renewable energy sources, either wind, and as Dr. Ahmed mentioned, now solar power or PV prices dropped dramatically. If you look at this 10 years ago or 5 years ago, the difference is huge. So by development, it's getting better and better. So all of these factors we need to look at, and it helps as well.
Thank you, Mai, and let me address my final question to Marco. With the public wealth funds here in the region, particularly the UAE and Saudi, to some extent also the upper middle income class countries, Egypt, do you find these helpful as catalysts for business in this sector? Do they crowd in investments or crowd out investments?
I find them an enabler. I think the point I was making before, the more you can coagulate, and deploy large amount of capital, the more you can build scale and be fast. So the experience is that, and the G2G approach that particularly today Saudi Arabia and the Emirates are taking to many of these regions, I see that they're really helping. So I would like to see more of that and not less.
Thank you, Marco. And with that, let me close this session and invite you to stay to the next session, which is going to begin in 15 minutes. We will explore strategies to mobilize private capital into the MENA region's green energy sector. Our panelists include His Excellency Dr. Taniel Zayudi, UAE Minister of State for Foreign Trade, Dr. Mahmoud Mohieddin, UN Climate Change High-Level Champion for COP27, Jay Collins, Chairman of Corporate and Investment Banking at Citi, and Mai Nasrallah, Executive Chairwoman of the Renewable Partners. So for those who are present here, please stay with us. For our remote audience, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you all. Thanks to our esteemed panelists, and see you again in a few minutes. Thank you.